Okay, students, welcome back to the biology unit. We're going to take a look at the AP enhancement for the respiratory system. Of course, this is being pulled from grade 11 bio. Okay, so now we have a definition here for respiration: the intake of oxygen from the environment and delivery to all body cells with the concurrent transport of carbon dioxide from cells and its removal from the body. So that's a really thorough definition. That means oxygen in and then delivered to the body cells, and carbon dioxide removed from the body cells and then brought to the lungs and eliminated, right? And that's that process, right? O2 in, CO2 out is the summary, but there's a lot of gas exchange going on in between, okay? So we've got several steps. We've got breathing, which is inhalation and exhalation, okay? That's our first, we got to get the air in and out, okay? We've got external respiration. That's that exchange of gas, the exchange of O2 and carbon dioxide between the lungs and the blood, okay? Oxygen, remember, is going to move from the lungs into the blood. The carbon dioxide is going to move the other way, okay? So we always want to be keeping track of which way our O2 is moving and which way our CO2 is moving. Internal respiration is now the oxygen is in the blood and it's passed into the body cells, okay? And the carbon dioxide is the waste from the body cells, and it's been passed back into the blood so that it can be removed from the body, okay? And then finally, cellular respiration, which is the chemical reactions, and I want to point some out here. It's the series of chemical reactions that occur in cells to generate ATP from glucose for cellular activities. We want to get this ATP is the money. That's the fuel for the body. That's what we really, really want, okay? So what we want to do is we want to make sure we produce this ATP, and it takes a series of reactions to get that, that series of reactions is summed up in the chemical equation for cellular respiration, which is our O2 plus glucose produces CO2 plus H2O plus ATP. That's a summary. Okay, that is a summary of a long series of chemical reactions. This is just a summary. And you will get that not here, but later. Okay? Now let's begin structurally with our look at the respiratory system. We're going to begin with nostrils, or as we call them, nares. Okay? Nares allow air in and out. Now you can also breathe through the mouth, okay? But the preference is that you're breathing through the nose. And the reason why we prefer that is because air needs to be warm, clean, and moist before it gets to the lungs. And the mouth can do that, but the nose is much better at ensuring that, okay? You have these bones inside the nose, and they're called turbinate bones, and they work to increase the surface area of the nasal passages, make sure they're open and make sure there's lots of space on the inside for these processes to happen, okay? The thin membrane that rests over the turbinate bones contains capillaries, and the capillaries have warm blood. And the warm blood heats the air before it enters the lungs, and that thin membrane secretes mucus to moisten the air and to trap any particulate, this should be particulate matter, any dust or dirt or whatever, okay? So we've got mucus in there, we've got those blood cells, all in the interest of warm, clean, moist air heading into the lungs, okay? The cell membrane, the cells also have cilia, and cilia are hair-like extensions of the cell membrane, and they act like a filter, okay? They move around the mucus, and they trap materials, and then they move it either towards the nose or the throat to be sneezed or coughed out, okay? So they can move around just to kind of get any of that dust or particulate matter out of the body, like a nice little filter. And the mouth doesn't have this, okay? Once the air has been warmed, cleaned, and moistened, it passes through the pharynx, which is like our throat, really it's the back of the throat, okay? And the air wants to go into the trachea, and we call that opening, which is really, it's about here, okay? We call it the glottis. And the epiglottis is a little flap of skin or a lid that closes over this glottis And the idea is to prevent food from entering the trachea. Okay? We do not want food ending up in the trachea, getting stuck, or making its way into the lungs and getting stuck. Okay? It's not good at all. Okay? Now, between the trachea, which is here, and the glottis, we find the larynx, and that's our voice box. So let's take a closer look at our voice box. It's made of cartilage. Now, remember, cartilage has a little bit of strength. It's got some structure to it, okay? But it's also a little bit flexible. So the larynx is called the voice box because it's involved in the production of sound. It contains vocal cords. And what they are two folds of a really tough membrane. And they're stretched across the larynx. So you can see that here. You can see the trachea underneath. This is like a top-down view. And you can see these vocal cords, these tough membranes, okay? And when we're breathing, okay, they're apart to let air pass freely, okay? But they can close when we're not breathing. And what happens is we push air through these vocal cords and they vibrate. And when they vibrate, they create sound. That's the idea. And so here, what we're doing is, look, and you don't need to know this, but think back to physics, waves. Did we not discuss how we can vibrate things and have the vibrations make a sound? So here we're tying together biology and physics. You can't separate these sciences. They are tied together. Now, you're going to go on in your education and you're going to take certain focuses in certain directions, but you must understand that chem, physics, and biology are intertwined. They can't be separated from one another, okay? Now, let's scroll down here and take a look at the trachea, okay? The trachea is about 10 or 12 centimeters long, and it extends from the throat, okay, really just below the voice box, although sometimes we count the voice box as part of the trachea, but we're going to say from below the voice box, okay, below the larynx, to the center of the chest, okay? And it's a tube, and it's flexible, okay? But it's supported internally by what we call these C rings of cartilage. And again, cartilage has a shape, but cartilage is a little bit flexible, but it still holds its shape, okay? And the goal there is to ensure that the trachea does not collapse, okay? Now, we have these cells all through the trachea called goblet cells, and they secrete mucus. And that mucus, that sticky mucus, is meant to trap foreign particles like dust and bacteria, okay? Epithelial cells make up the inner lining of the trachea, and they're ciliated. So these cells on the inside of the trachea also have these cilia, and you can see in a picture here these hairs floating out. So it's not hard to believe that they are like a filter, right? Because they're kind of hairy, and you kind of can see how things might get caught in them as they travel down the trachea, okay? But they also move, and they move in a wave-like fashion, okay? And the idea is that they actually sweep mucus and the trapped substances within the mucus upwards towards the pharynx, where it's removed by the body, okay? And of course, that is a cough or a sneeze, okay? So it's a sneeze if it's sort of if it gets as far as your nose, it's sort of a sneeze, right? If it's sort of at the base of your throat, it's a cough, okay? So we see the cilia all from the nose, the nasal passage, all the way down the trachea, and then finally the trachea is going to split into two. It's going to go into two directions, okay? And the two directions here we call the bronchi. And the singular is bronchus. So let's take a look here and see what's important here. What's important to me is that we notice how much of this is made out of cartilage. Because you have to be able to move. Listen, you have to be able to bend and move. That's vital to our survival, is the ability to bend and move. But you must also do everything in your power to ensure that this trachea does not collapse. And, the larynx can't collapse, or the bronchi can't collapse, okay? And because if they do, well, you're not going to be able to breathe. And so it's essential to have this cartilage all the way around, okay? And what we notice here is that there's some angular cartilage that's going this way and some tracheal cartilage that's going this way, and it just helps to give a little bit of stability, okay? And if we look here at the cross-section, first I want to highlight the esophagus. Yeah, we're done the digestive system. We did it already. But look how flat it is. Because the esophagus can be flat when it's not being used, and then when you swallow something, it'll expand and contract and push things down with peristalsis, okay? But the trachea needs to be in constant use. It needs to have constant air coming through. So when we look at this cross-section, we see big, thick pieces of cartilage here, making sure it stays open, okay? It must stay open, okay? And then, you know, this is labeled as the ciliated epithelium. You can't really see much there, but you can see that there's tissue on the inside of that ring as well, and that's the ciliated tissue. Okay, so we've got the right and left bronchus here. Now at the end of the trachea splits into two bronchi. One goes to each lung. That makes sense because we have two lungs. Okay. What happens after that is the enter the lung. Okay. And the bronchi will then branch out even further into smaller and smaller and gradually smaller tubes, and they'll become bronchioles. And you can actually go on YouTube and you can find a video or several videos of people putting cameras down their people putting cameras on the trachea, doctors or researchers putting trachea down subjects, or putting cameras down subjects' trachea. It's not an internet challenge, it's just people doing research. Sending that camera all the way down, and you can see how the pathway gets gradually smaller and smaller as you go down into the lungs. And we need it to get smaller and smaller because the idea is we want to maximize surface area. So when we get to the alveoli, our mantra should be SA, surface area. So the bronchioles get so small that they're going to end at these grape-like clusters of air sacs called alveoli. How small are the alveoli, singular alveolus? Well, they're so small that you can fit 500 million alveoli in each lung, okay? So in each lung, you have 500 million of these little tiny air sacs, okay? And of course, you've got a corresponding number of bronchioles reaching those alveoli. So that means between both lungs, you got about 1 billion of these air sacs, okay? And that is really maximizing surface area. Now, each alveolus has a membrane that's 1 cell thick, okay? But if we took the total surface area of the membrane, right? So if we looked at every single one of the alveoli and we flattened it all out, okay? You would have surface area that's equivalent to the surface area of a tennis court inside your lungs, okay? All rounded up, kind of folded in these alveoli, okay? And again, you have to be getting this idea of scale now, of how tiny these alveoli are. And you must also be getting a scale of how tiny these capillaries are, okay? Because each alveolus is surrounded by a capillary network to ensure gas exchange, okay? We know that oxygen diffuses into the capillaries and carbon dioxide diffuses out of the blood and into the lungs, okay? Now, this process is spontaneous. It occurs based on the concentration gradient, okay? Substances will always move from high concentration to an area of low concentration, okay? And that's just a completely random molecular motion where they're bouncing around and they're going to end up spreading out from high to low, okay? Now, oxygen, we talked about this in the last lesson, is grabbed by the hemoglobin in blood, okay? So 99% of the oxygen in blood is found actually within the red blood cells attached to hemoglobin, with only a small percentage dissolved in the blood plasma, okay? Carbon dioxide is kind of the reverse. Carbon dioxide, only 23% is carried in the red blood cells, but 77% is dissolved in the blood plasma, okay? So there's nothing, listen, watching it, this is just defined by diffusion, this random movement of particles from an area of high to low concentration, okay? And we depend on it. And so the blood plasma and the red blood cells depend on diffusion to make sure they have the correct concentration of each of these molecules at any given time, okay? Now, let's look at this photo. So first of all, let's talk about the air coming in, we're bringing air in, okay? That air is rich with oxygen compared to the blood. Actually, you know what? Let's start with this. Let me change that. Let's start with blood, okay? Blood's coming in from the pulmonary artery. So remember, the heart is pumping blood in the pulmonary circuit. It's deoxygenated, okay? So this is deoxygenated. I'm going to write DE-O2, okay? Blood. Okay, there's very little oxygen here. So this is coming from the heart, it's deoxygenated, comes in and comes close to the alveoli. This is just a single alveoli. And look how tiny the capillary is. It's only one cell thick. Okay, so because the concentration of oxygen is so low in the red blood cells and the blood plasma, oxygen is going to diffuse out of the alveoli into the blood. Okay, because remember, you've just breathed in fresh air. Okay. Now what's going to happen is the concentration of CO2 is really high in this blood. So as we come around, we're also going to drop off lots of CO2 because the CO2 is really high in this blood. So it's going to escape into the alveolus. And then that CO2 is going to be exhaled. So after the blood passes by the alveolus and it leaves and it goes to the pulmonary vein back to the heart, it's going to be very high in O2 and low in CO2. So here it starts, it's high O2, low O2 here, high CO2, okay? And then the couple other things that I want to point out here, there's a very thin layer of epithelial tissue here on the alveolus. So there's a thin bit of tissue between the capillary and the alveolus. And there's also a film of moisture. There's a little bit of moisture because diffusion generally requires that O2 and CO2 be dissolved, okay? So we need that moisture to just kind of dissolve the O2 and CO2. Okay, and we're going to move a little bit forward here. We're going to repeat this process because what we want to do is really want to get a good idea of what's coming in and what's going out, okay? And the colors here are important because we can see that blood is coming towards the lung and it's blue. Of course, it's not really blue, but in the diagram it's blue. And it's blue because it's deoxygenated, okay? So it's coming in with high CO2 and low O2, okay? And when it's leaving high in oxygen and low in carbon dioxide. Okay. Now, I'm not really worried too much about the naming, but if you read any of these names, any of these labels, they make a lot of sense because we can connect to the pulmonary artery and to the pulmonary vein. We can connect to that. That makes sense to us because what we want to do is we want to be able to connect the roles of O2. Oops, no, that's not what I wanted to say. Of the respiratory system and the circulatory system. Okay? We want to be able to connect their roles. So this is the point at which these two systems connect. Okay? And what we want to do is we want to look here let's see, where do I want to look? Oh yeah, okay. So a couple other things that I want to mention here in this diagram is that as we come in, this is a bronchiole, and then it kind of enters this alveolar duct, okay? And there's a big sac of alveoli. It's a bunch of alveoli that are connected. We call it the alveolar sac, and the alveoli are kind of connected to that sac. So we can kind of see them like bunches of grapes is the idea that I want to get across, okay? That's our idea here, okay? And the other thing that I want to show here is this complete network of capillaries that surround the alveolar sac, okay? It's not just one capillary passing by, it's a complete network, a complete net. Because we want to maximize surface area. Okay, we want to maximize surface area. And again, we can see how deoxygenated blood comes close. CO2 goes here. O2 comes out, okay, right, into the blood. And then when the blood leaves the alveolar sac, it's rich in O2 and it has very little CO2, okay? So these three diagrams are really showing the same thing over and over again. But it's really important that we know which direction oxygen is moving in and which direction CO2 is moving in at this stage, okay? So we call the capillaries that are coming by the alveolar sac, we call it the capillary bed, okay? Because it's just a network of capillaries, okay? What else do I want to talk about? Okay, there's a couple other things that we want to maybe point out here that are bonus information. We've talked about the veins and the arteries that connect. Mucus glands. Yep, there's mucus all over the place. How else are you going to get the moisture in there? Okay, there's a lining that's filled with mucus. You got a lot of mucus on the inside of your body. This diagram is a great summary of all the different parts of the respiratory system. And there's a lot here that we don't need to worry about. We're not really looking at the sinus glands. We're not really worried about frontal sinus or sphenoid sinus. We're not worried too much about the different types of cartilage that we have. We don't care about the apex. Those aren't the parts that we care about, but you can see the complexity. What I like about this diagram is that we see this structure of the lungs on the inside, and we see basically like a reverse tree. We see a reverse tree here, where the roots of the tree are up here, and all the branches come out here, and they're really, really complex. So it's always important to describe these lungs like we do trees, right? But they're upside down, okay? Let's see, what else do we have here? Now we got a close-up of the mouth. So you can see a lot of different organs here. You can see, look, here's what I'm going to say. Do you have to memorize all these different categories? Nasopharynx, oropharynx, laryngopharynx? No, we don't. Do you need to know where the paranasal sinuses are? No, I wouldn't worry about it too much, okay? I'm not panicked about those things, okay? What we need to know, though, is how specific anatomy and physiology gets. Physiology gets specific, okay? You don't need to know this now, but you might. Because if you ever intend on becoming a doctor or a specialist or some kind of a surgeon, yeah, you're going to have to know this stuff. You're going to have to be very specific about describing the parts of the body that you're worried about, okay? So that's why I'm kind of showing this to you. And again, the other thing that I want to do is just be mindful of the flow of air into the body, down the trachea, through the vocal cords, okay? Let's see, moving forward from here. That is about it for our AP enhancement, okay? Our focus here with the grade 11 material is just having a deeper understanding of the structure of these alveolar sacs and how the capillaries come around and how air diffuses in and out. But we've got a pretty good overview between the grade 10 and the grade 11 stuff. What I'm going to do is I'm going to recommend that we work on these questions here that are in the package. And there are more questions, and then I really want to highlight this last question, where you'll take a couple of notes about these various, and they're brief notes about these various respiratory illnesses, okay? If you have any questions, please shoot me an email. Until our next lesson, please stay healthy, stay safe, take care. Bye-bye.